I'm a melancholy man, that's what I am. All the world surrounds me.
One of the titles that was bestowed upon you by fans of the Moody Blues was that of the Mellotron Master, after the famed instrument that you played with the Moody Blues and in some of your recent work. In fact, you recently contributed to an album that was based upon just music from the Mellotron. What is it about that instrument that draws fans' attention? I mean, you know, Justin didn't, as far as I know, gain Gibson Guru, you know. What is it about the Mellotron?
I'm not really sure, other than when I was first introduced to it, I fell in love with it immediately because, you know, back then it was state-of-the-art, and it was the original analog sampler. And so for me, it meant that all of a sudden I'd found a door that I could walk through that would enable me to be my own orchestra, a dream come true.
The more I learn about the Mellotron, at first it was a keyboard that made neat sounds. And then I learned more about it and the tapes and everything. To someone who doesn't know, about a Mellotron, how would you describe it to them?
Each side of the keyboard, there's 35 notes. And on the items that I used, the Mark II and the Mark V, they both had 35-note keyboards, one on the left and one on the right. I would describe it as a 70-channel playback recorder, because under each key was a capstan, a pinch roller, and a pad, and a piece of tape. And so anytime you pressed a note down, it would play back 8 seconds of sound from tape. Across the tape path would go across the capstan roller, and the pad would push the tape down onto the playback head, and the sound would come through. And so really it was, every time you hit it, you were playing back a tape. But instead of switching a knob or a lever and it keeps playing, it was an instantaneous thing where you would press and on and off.
That doesn't sound something to me like an instrument you would want to take on the road. But
not really, but...
but my understanding is that you were one of the few bands that do it successfully. How did you manage to get that, to the stage where you felt it was portable enough that you could bring it and it would be reliable?
The original machine had AC motors, which made it really difficult because if you were in a gymnasium or a theater or a club or anywhere actually, and everyone, if it was a cold night and everyone was turning on their heating or whatever, the electricity, if there was a large draw on the current, all of a sudden I would be playing and it would be because the electricity would go down and the AC motors were subject to that problem. So the first thing I did when I had the chance was I put printed circuit DC motors in there, which ran on 24 volts DC, and so that overcame that problem. And then the other thing was the original preamplifier used 12AX tubes, preamplifiers, and I gutted those out and put in transistorized NAB equalization cards and line amplifiers. So it sort of shrunk the thing down. I could easily change cards, and the motors were very, very efficient, so that solved those two problems.
And once you did those things, did you really find that it was easy to take on the road? Because fans, they'd say, oh, it's here and it's working, it must be working, but like, was it really hard, every time?
Well, originally I only had one because that's all I could afford, in fact, and it was a used one. Although I'd worked at the factory in 1962 or thereabouts, they were about $5,000 a piece. So I really couldn't afford one, even after the success of Go Now, our first hit record in 1960, late 64, early 65. Unfortunately, the management company we were with at the time had a deal with the record company, and we had a deal with the management company, and after Go Now, all the money came in, and we woke up one morning and made a call to the office, and the office wasn't there anymore. So we got about £50 a piece, which is about $100 or so each for the million selling Go Now. So we were still broke after that, and so I still couldn't afford one until we found a used one. And so when we did reform the band, and we brought John Lodge back in, who was to be the original bass player, but was still at college, and by that time he'd finished college, we brought John back in and gave Justin the lead guitar and vocal position. And so that's when we started to really work the mellotron into the band. And as soon as I possibly could, I bought a second one, and so that I could take two with us on the road, and that came in very handy.
In Legend of a Band, John Lodge was talking about there being 10,000 bands around the city of Birmingham around the time when the Go Now Moody Blues were
I told
formed.
John 10 million times not to exaggerate. It was probably a few, less than a couple hundred probably.
But the point, I guess, was there was a lot.
Yes.
And what was it about that time and place, if anything, that made it so conducive to there being bands that could get together and have such a good opportunity of being successful?
Well, I think there was a music store in the middle of Birmingham where everyone met on Saturdays. Most bands were workers during the week. We all had some job of some means of supporting ourselves because there wasn't really a professional circuit available, and so everyone was always trying to make it. Semi-pro was the banner we all worked under, and so there was always this camaraderie and friendliness between bands. There was very little bad feeling between bands and those kind of things. So there was an intermingling and a knowledge of each other, and we would end up playing with each other on different gigs, different ballrooms and clubs and things like that. So there was always that sort of common knowledge, and when you've grown up in a town, you get to know all of the various areas, and so that wasn't difficult.
I've heard in a reply to a question from other Moody Blues but I haven't heard your take on this, that as far as what did you feel the potential of Days of Future Past was when it was being recorded? We've heard, thought it was going to, it was too good, it had to be real good. We've heard, don't know. What did you think when you were actually in the studio recording Days?
Well, I could see where, the thought that this is, too much quality or a little too much classical influence or whatever to be popular. But I think the theme was the strength of it. It was really the strength, the whole idea of a day in the life of any human being, really. That's what the story was about. That was our version of a day in the life, whether we knew that John was writing his song or not, And for the most part, I think it was the novelty, in a sense, of the recording. Obviously, even the record company didn't think much of it at first, but there were two men, one in New York and one in London, who really liked it very much, and they put their weight behind it, and I think that was what helped it, come out immediately. So I think, simply it was the concept of it that struck people.
When songs were being composed for albums like To Our Children's Children's Children, there's this story that there's this coffee table, and that when band members had parts of songs written or they'd started songs, you'd all meet around this coffee table and put your unfinished works down, and everybody would kind of collaborate on it. Is that true? I mean,
that's not quite right. The coffee table is a fact. It should be put in a time capsule, really. But that was really where we generally had most of our discussions, and it was just that's where the most comfortable chairs were also, because not everyone was working at the same time. But generally speaking, if someone had a song that was almost ready to be picked, that was becoming ripened. For instance, going back to Days of Future Past, Ray wrote a song called Twilight Time. Ray at that time was not playing any piano or guitar, and of course harmonica and flute were Ray's instruments, and so Ray was fine with melodies but was not necessarily able to put chords and those kind of things to arrange that. So Ray would sit down with me at the piano, and that's how we really developed that. Ray would sing the song, and I sort of did the arrangement for it, and that happened a lot. And everyone would kick in something at some point. There would be, and then we would work with the drums, and Graham would get to put his two-penneth in, and John on bass, and Justin on guitar worked very closely in the same way as I did with everyone.
How did you pick when you had a song that was ready to bring, and how did you know that this was a song that you wanted to do?
Well, usually it was the best thing that you had at the moment. I mean, writing when you first start writing, it's quite difficult. And so you're always trying to better yourself. And there was always that challenge of trying to write something worthy of being on an album. And so we all faced that. That was a daily occurrence for us in terms of, that was part of the responsibility of being in the group and a recording group and trying to maintain musically, some kind of level of quality.
Do you think that the level of quality maybe that you were working on, did that also include like maybe part of the conceptual parts of the songs, or were they were left as they came and then it was just the music that was worked on when the songs were brought?
Well, usually, I can honestly say that I don't think any one of the 7 classic albums, as they're known, had anything in common with any of the others in terms of the conception or inception. They started slightly differently each time. Sometimes we would go in and there would be 2 or 3 or 4 songs already written, and then we would see what thread was maybe possibly running through these songs, or through one, or through 2 or 3 or 4 of the songs, and also we would be taking into account current affairs, what was happening at the time, and to give you an example of that, when we did To Our Children's Children, we had a big television set in the studio and we were watching moon landings. We were watching those guys bouncing around up there. And so that was a heavy influence, a great influence on us at that time. So we came in with a few things. I think I came in with, I don't remember what's on that album now. I was thinking of another album. But either way, my mind was always out in space anyway, because they used to call me Mickey the Moon Boy at school, because I was always building rocket ships and the like, and always my interest lay in astronomy and physics and the like, and so I was always very much involved in that. But just to give you an idea, that's how that came about, because we were feeding off the moon landings and looking at, here we are reaching for the stars, and what is the potential of this great leap for mankind, and so that would spark up ideas. But then again, with In Search of the Lost Chord, for instance, when I was about 5 years old, I heard a record which would have been about 1946, 47, something like that. I heard a record by an American whose name is Jimmy Durante, or was Jimmy Durante, and he had a song called I'm the Guy That Found the Lost Chord. And he had a big nose, and he sang like that. He was a wonderful artist. And that stuck with me. I mean, it just endeared itself to me. And so in 1968, the whole idea of the lost chord, coupled with my own personal investigation of mythology and world religions, and my initiation into Maharishi's TM meditation, those kind of things, it sort of all came together, and I realized that I could use this lost chord story and metaphor as a springboard for an album concept, and say things that were really happening then in 1968.
Did a lot of the things, besides current events, did a lot of them come from your past, things that you remembered from?
Well, for me personally, yes. That one would be the greatest example. The other great example would be that there was a favorite piece of music that was not so much the piece of music that was my favorite, but it was the title of this piece, and it was by Duke Ellington, and it was called Mood Indigo. And once again, I don't know why, but that sort of stuck to me too, just like, like a thistle on a woolen sock in the summer. It was one of the things I couldn't shake it loose. And so when the time came where I'd left my job at Mellotron, I went down to Ray Thomas' place of work, which was a tool factory, and met Ray for his lunch break and said, Ray, it's time to quit the job, let's go start another band. And so that was the beginning of the Moody Blues. And Ray and I then went out and recruited the other members of the original band. But Ray and I were sitting in an office one day contemplating the idea of trying to get a couple of £1,000 together to try and buy equipment and clothes and a vehicle necessary, for the new group we had then formed. And there was a giant brewery in our hometown called Mitchells and Butlers, and they used the initials MB for short. So it was a pint of M&B, you know. And so we were mulling this over in our heads, and at that time we'd formed the band and we were playing a lot of R&B and blues music, and a lot of American blues singers were coming over to England and Europe because it was a very lucrative thing for them at that time. People like Sonny Boy Williamson and Memphis Slim come to mind immediately, and we were touring around England with these guys playing blues, backing them up, you know, doing all of that stuff. And so I realized that we were playing blues, and so that took care of the B. We were trying to tie a name in so that we could do some sort of a marketing strategy with M&B. And of course, then I realized why I'd kept the mood sticking to me, because I needed that word. So Moody Blues is how the name was formed. That still left me, though, with Indigo, still sticking up there, you say. And so when I eventually moved to California in 1974, I bought a ranch in Malibu, which, for history buffs' sake, it was the drying out place for John Barrymore, the actor, who was heavily into, you know, jugging it. And I bought it from the man who owned the Stetson Hat Company. And when I got up there, it was 60 acres, and it was beautiful, and it was originally called Verdant Valley, and I said, this is everything but green. You know, being in Malibu, it was actually, there was blues and purples and wonderful hues, since it turned out to be part of the Chumash Indian sacred grounds. And I called it Indigo Ranch, because it was just an obvious thing. And once again, that thing that was sticking to me, you know, came into full use, and I got full use out of both words for that title, you know. So those kind of impressions that I had when I was young definitely had a great effect from my point of view on what I was doing with the band, and you know, the kind of things that I was affected by. I'd heard in my childhood many things about music, for instance, and sound. You know, that sound had this wonderful, well, sound had a power that could be used for good or for destructive purposes, and often the walls of Jericho were used, of course. But also, you know, the wonderful power possibly that music contained, the power to heal, the power to lift, to raise consciousness, and all of those wonderful, tame the savage beast, all of those kind of things. And so I sort of vowed to myself, if ever I had a chance and I got a band together that was successful and I had the opportunity to do something about it, that I would experiment as much as I could to see if any of this stuff that I'd been fed, you know, really worked. And so it was a big experiment for me deep down, I mean, things that I've come to realize later.
You mentioned how you left Mellotron, you talked to Ray and said, you know, let's go do this. And that sounds like a relatively spontaneous thing. And I'd heard this story recently that during the recording of In Search of the Lost Chord, that Departure was supposed to have a different ending, but that in the studio it got changed and they decided to use what happened?
The actual poem. Mm-hmm. Yes, this is one of the poems that Graham wrote that he actually spoke, and I thought the part was perfect for him to do it. This is like, no, you do this one, you know. Mm-hmm. Yes, in fact, it was supposed to be just very simple, you know, to help us to find the lost chord. But until when he got to that point, it was just, for him, it became, something tickled him. I mean, it just turned out to be this wondrous, hysterical laughter. And it just sounded so wonderful. It's like, that's it, keep that. Forget the other one. Let's use that one.
And they use them to help us to find.
Did that happen a lot when you were in the studios, that things got changed and you liked what happened so much that that's what you went with?
Oh, yes, definitely. You know, if things are too planned out, then you end up with, I could say, very much the kind of music that we're listening to on the radio these days. Mm-hmm. It's very, very, it's all thought out, and it's a little bit like taking the ingredients and putting them in the sausage machine. You know exactly what's coming out. It's very, very predictable.
It seems that a lot of the work I've been listening to, particularly from Among the Stars, and from what I've heard, that these have been worked on in advance for a long time, and a lot of work has gone into them. Does that inhibit your spontaneity at all when you're doing these things, that they've been drawn out so long? You know, was it better for you to, you know, get it done all at once, or the way that you're doing it now?
No, in this case, actually, I think it worked to my advantage because most of the tracks, at least 2/3 of the tracks, were recorded almost in a live situation at Indigo Ranch through the 80s, through that decade. But they were head arrangements. It was where I would sit with the musicians and I would play the song through with guitar possibly or piano, but mainly guitar, and sing the song, and everyone would just say, oh, okay, and make their own little musical notes. And then the ideas would start flashing around from head to head, you know, and hence the head arrangement, because it was made up on the spur of the moment. And so usually within about 40 minutes we had a complete arrangement, and we were already on, you know, on take 2. And so I had that spontaneity already there, captured. And it was what do I do with them now? That was the other question. But it was also at the time where my children were very young, and I was really making, you know, spearheading off towards my new marriage and making a family. And so that was really my preoccupation at the time. And it was not so important for me to try and make a solo album and put it out and be successful, especially since the hot thing at the time was disco and punk rock, you see. So it was a little bit like, it would have been the time to swim upstream is not when there's a bunch of logs coming down the river. Mm-hmm. It was like, just wait and there'll be the right time to do this.
Now, I have a clip from the aforementioned video, Legend of a Band, the documentary of the Moody Blues, where the band is discussing the period approaching the time where they split. And I'd just like you to see it to refresh your memory with it before I ask you my next question.
Right.
It really is a strange feeling when you have somebody coming to you to be blessed.
And I think that was where we started to lose our own sense of identity as actual people. You know, if you start just living that life, a protected life with people running around after your every whim all the time, it's dangerous.
In fact, it really ruined Mike Pinder. It really did his head in really badly, which was one of the things we tried to sort of see if we could put right in that 4 years off, see if he could come around, but he tried, but he couldn't. He couldn't face going back out on the road again. He made octave with us when we reformed, but he couldn't go on the road. He got right as far as standing there in the office, pen in his hand, to sign the contract, and just couldn't do it.
What were your feelings at the time when you had to choose which road you were going to take musically?
It was very simple, actually. It was not a musical choice. It was a choice between carrying on doing something that by then I'd already done and achieved an incredible measure of success. It was a choice between repeating that over and over again incessantly, or actually taking a new path in my life and fulfilling some of the other dreams that I had within me. In fact, the very thing that Justin was talking about there is fairly true in terms of by that time we were being very isolated by the business, by the management, by the agency people, the whole rock star thing of being picked up at the airport, taken to the hotel, taken to the gig, to the restaurant and back to the hotel, and never really meeting anyone, was beginning to take its toll on everyone. But then at the end of the world tour in 1974, which is what Graham started to talk about, you know, we were all very, very tired. By that time, I think we'd hit over 50 countries in all since we'd started touring. And everybody was ready for a break. We tried to go in to do another album after Seventh Sojourn and sat there for 3 weeks looking at each other across the coffee table. And I remember saying specifically one day, you know, what are we doing this for? That we're not going to get anywhere. Why don't we just go home? So everybody decided to do that, and we did so. But then I came to America in '74, as I told you, and started to find my way around and bought my ranch and did those kind of things. But most importantly, I met my wife, Tara, and at that time Tony Clark came over in early '77 and said, how about putting a new album together? And And I said, well, that's fine. I only have one problem, though, and that is I can't go back to England because the immigration service had lost my paperwork, and my son from my first marriage, Daniel, was about 2.5, 3 years old by then. And if I'd have left the country, I wouldn't have been able to get back in, and therefore my son would have been here and I wouldn't. So that was a big part of my decision. And so I said, well, you know, so that's the problem, but if the guys wanted to come to America and do it, then I'd be available. So Tony went back and talked to them, and it was decided that they would come to America. But I did find out later, I believe, that the message they got some way or other wasn't quite the message I sent. I believe the message they got was that Mike doesn't want to come to England. You have to come to him, which is a very arrogant statement, and it was totally untrue. So consequently, when they did come over, there was a lot of unsaid misunderstandings and feelings swimming about during those recording sessions, which just got so overwhelming. It was like, I don't think I'm having any fun anymore, you know. And so that's really when I was deciding that I would take the route of you know, a new marriage and building up a family. And the thing that, unfortunately, what Graham was talking about, and it's very sad that it actually went onto videotape, is actually a misunderstanding of the grossest type, because he obviously didn't understand what I was going through and what I was feeling. In terms of the fans doing me in or anything, there couldn't be anything farther from the truth, because if anyone, I was the person who mingled with the fans the most and invited the most of the fans backstage afterwards. I would deliberately go out in the hotel and talk to people. So unfortunately, you know, the rumors start that simply, along with the fact, the rumors that I went to live with Hopi Indians and that I was abducted by a spaceship. And I can promise you I was not abducted for a spaceship for longer than 3 hours, okay? And, you know, and that I had a lobotomy and all of these, I mean, stupid things, and all caused from misunderstanding. So what Graham didn't understand is that I'd already made my mind up that I was going to be taking this route back to the tribe, as I call it. I was going to leave the rock star thing and come back to the tribe and try and live a normal life so my kids could grow up and play in the streets, you know, those kind of things. And so, you know, his misunderstanding is unfortunate, and the little bit at the end of the statement about he said he had the pen in his hand and he was at the desk in the office, it's not true. What actually happened was Jerry Weintraub, who was then our manager, called me up on the phone and said, well, are we going to do this tour? Which had been raised, by the way, towards the end of making the album. There was no mention of a tour previous to this. It was like, here we are struggling to make an album, and the management and agency want us to do a tour because that's the only way they're going to get any money out of it. They dropped that bombshell on us. We want you to do a tour. So he called me up, and I was sitting there with my wife at home on the telephone with him, and he said, well, are you going to do the tour or not? Because we have to make the contracts. And I looked at my wife, Tara, and I saw this wonderful vision of what we were going to do together in the future, spending our lives together, raising our children, and having wonderful fun. And I said, no, I cannot bring myself to come on tour. Sorry. Goodbye. Boom. So that's really what happened.
If it hadn't been for the touring, do you think you would have, like, remained, you know, record on the albums but not tour or something? Or
That's actually what I did have in mind, but I don't think they were open to that.
Many people would say about the band becoming enclosed, you know, being the band members, wouldn't they be the ones making the decisions, you know, in terms of whether or not they had opportunities to get in touch with their fans and what was happening when they were being transported to places. What do you feel led the Moody Blues to becoming so enclosed like that? From starting off from traveling around across country in a car to, you know, being so enclosed?
Well, I can only speak personally. I've always been a person of conviction. I've always followed my convictions. So I'm not a person who has been ever led by fear or confusion. And even though we saw some incredible things and saw some incredibly stupid people, and including people who would sit on the side of the road with big banners when we came to town saying the end of the world is going to be at the end of the Moody Blues concert. You know, just people who had imbibed far too much. It was a little scary in terms of, you know, people are taking some of the things that we're saying just totally out of context. There was that element to it, but I think the isolation was really caused by the management and the record company executives and the agency and those kind of things. You see, you have to realize that the best way to make some money off other people is to keep them in the dark. Because if they don't know where they're going and you have someone who manages them in terms of taking them out and into the limo, just make sure they get in the car and then take them to there and there and there, then you cannot have any idea of what's really going on. And so for me, that's become very, very clear because I don't have a manager, I don't have an agent, I don't have anything like that. In fact, I only have one publicist, and she works directly for me exclusively on television. And I call of the radio stations myself. I call of the newspapers people myself. I make personal contacts, and I'm making personal friends and everything. It's my own record label. So no one's telling me anything that I must do. So I can book my own hotels, and I rent my own cars, and I call up friends and say, would you like to meet with us? Maybe you could pick us up at the airport. And in other words, I got the opportunity to return to the tribe and become a normal human being again. You know, reverse the very happenings of the things that you talk about.
You mentioned One Step Records being your own label, and also the Moody Blues had Threshold as kind of their own little, right?
Yes, it was a label we started, you know, back then around 70, I think, or 71. Unfortunately, it didn't do very well in terms of other acts, so it really just became an umbrella for group activities.
So was the idea behind starting Threshold to try to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish with One Step Records, and that you wouldn't be managed so much? Was that the idea behind Threshold, or what was the conception that you need to do this?
The idea behind Threshold was simply to retain creative control and to try and expand upon it and hopefully be a stepping stone for other worthy acts, you know, creative people who had something to say that was positive. That was the real, the motto, you know.
One album that you produced that would get skipped over if we went from Moody Blues to Among the Stars was The Promise. Although there were some similarities in you know, style towards Moody Blues music, and you know, your songs with the Moody Blues, there were key differences. What was it about that album that was different when you were putting it together? What were your inspirations behind it when you were doing that album?
Promise was really a collection of material that I had, they were like leftovers. They were the crumbs and the odd current and date and slice of banana that was left over from this wonderful feast, being the Moody Blues 7 main albums. And they were just bits and pieces of things that couldn't make it into the albums because of their personal content or you know, various different kinds of reasons. It also came at a time when I bought Indigo Ranch, renamed it the Indigo, and was building or converting the house into a recording studio. And I had a handful of friends up there who happened to be carpenters in the daytime and musicians in the evening. And so, and some of them were only semi-professional and amateur too. And so it felt very warm and nice. We had this wonderful relationship between us all. And so I thought I would make an album you know, including those people. And so we had a mixture of professional, semi-professional, and amateur people partaking in the album. And so, consequently, you know, it didn't sound quite the same. It was a much looser kind of thing. Once again, it was head arrangements, more or less, and then I would then, you know, put some arrangement over the top of the basic tracks, the basic rhythm.
So could it be said then, just you know, from what you said, that The Promise was kind of your closing the chapter on the Moody Blues, taking the things you had that you had wanted to say but didn't feel were right for the Moody Blues context, and this was your way to get them out?
Yes, in a sense, because you know, I think they were a little sensitive towards the kind of material that that I, in particular, was putting forward in the band. You know, I had all of these things from my childhood that I wanted my own personal aims and goals and ideas, and I think, you know, that there was a certain element in the band that was hoping that they could sing more pop songs, and I don't think that they viewed their careers in quite the same way as I viewed mine. I never really thought of myself as a musician, deep down I felt more a communicator than a musician or entertainer. Being a musician and being an entertainer for those years is something that I did, but it's not necessarily what I wanted to really spend my life doing.
I've heard you say that you were waiting for the right time to re-enter the music scene. What made you decide this is the time to try it?
When my youngest son, I have 3 sons, Daniel, 24, Mike's going to be 17 in February, and Matthew is 15. When my youngest son came to me and said, who just got his driving permit and everything, when actually Mike came to me about a year or 18 months ago and said, Dad, can I borrow the car? It was like, I think we've raised these boys, they're weaned, you know. It's like when your children come to you and they need just a little bit of advice, but they do need the car keys and some money. You know that they're about ready to start, taking that practice flight off the branch. That's what felt right, of course, is that, now this is a time where I can now devote some time to the music, because I was not really going to be sitting at home waiting for my children to come in from wherever they wanted to go.
In terms of the releases of Off the Shelf and Among the Stars particularly, what was the response to the music like compared to what you thought? Did you get a lot of response, or did you have any preconceptions as to what you might get?
I had no idea, because it had been so long. Putting Off the Shelf out was at the request of just a handful of people, including Mark Murley from Higher and Higher magazine, who I felt a real warmth with. And so it sounded like a really good idea, since I had some of this material at hand. So I spent a little time putting 5 of the tracks together. The response was overwhelming, quite frankly, and even more overwhelming when I then incorporated those 5 tracks and reworked them a little more and added the rest of the album to it and retitled it Among the Stars. I've just come from meeting several hundred people in Syracuse, and I'm continually being told I love the album. I just love it. It's great. I play it every day. I play it in the car on the way to work. It's just like it always was. I don't think I could recount all of the wonderful things that I'm being told.
Some of the songs from Among the Stars, as you mentioned, were partially written, through a long period of time, and then they were finished up. When you write a song or you start a song, do you, say, I think I'm going to write something, and then you sit down and write it, or do you say, I want to write something about that, or how does the process work?
Usually 2 different ways for me. One is usually is that I could be doing almost anything, and all of a sudden a seed idea will descend upon me. It'll be something to do with, usually something to do with the state of the world, humanity, some serious thought, usually, with the exception of things like the When You're Sleeping, the children's song, was not necessarily a serious thought, although it does have an undercurrent of seriousness in terms of the seriousness of loving our children and our children loving us. But beyond that, it's always some method of communication. For me, I've always thought in metaphors. I've always thought visually. I think one of the reasons that the Moody's music was, had this particular quality was because I always thought visually. I was always trying to create visual patterns, backdrops of music, landscapes of music. And so we would create a landscape, and within the landscape then we would have the actors at the foreground, and those kind of ideas. So it's a very sort of conceptual way of looking at production and creativity. And so it can start with just a line, just a few words, but a seed idea for something. And then the other way would be if I'm in the studio and maybe I've been doing some technical adjustments or wiring in a new piece of equipment. And and I can't wait to hear the new sounds off the new CD-ROM that I just got. And all of a sudden, I'll play something with this new sound, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's very nice. I really like that. I could do something with that. I may store it in the computer you know, as a MIDI file or something like that. Or it may start to progress automatically, and then all of a sudden that one seed thought that I thought about a few days ago might just fit together with it. So those two things usually comes about. A musical sequence of some kind, and then I try and fit something together with that.
When you mentioned trying to create a landscape with your music, the first thing that came to my mind was your latest release, A Planet with One Mind, the CD with children's stories.
The children's stories, yes.
One question that I have is, out of all the children's stories out there, how do you pick the ones that you're going to use for your CDs?
You sit down on the floor in the children's book department, where whenever you have the time, and you sift through the hundreds of books that are out there looking for that gem. My wife Tara and I, while we're out and about, if we have a couple of hours free, we'll find a bookstore and go and look. Because you literally do have to go through a couple of hundred books to find one or two really good stories. Stories that are not, you know, the brown fox went down to the bear's tea party and they had a great time. You know, that's not the kind of stories I'm looking for. I'm looking for stories that will affect children of all ages, and that's why the subtitle to this first one of the three is called A Planet with One Mind, Stories from Around the World for the Child Within Us All. And so we're actually, since we've been out on this promotional tour, my wife Tara and I have decided that we're no longer going to call it a children's album, but a family album, because moms and dads have been coming to us with their children saying, you know, I just love that third story, and I like the fourth one, and all of those things. So I can see that there's as much enthusiasm from the parents and as well as the children. But so it's definitely not just a children's album. And the stories are based on what we're looking for. The criteria was that it had some sort of mythological significance, that it had a significance, it had a lesson to teach, that it contained good advice, a calming effect, that it had the magic to hold your attention, and that at the end of a story you would be left with something that tasted like milk and honey, if you like. And that's based on the fact that my involvement in mythology, my interest in mythology, you know, has brought me to the understanding that mythology allows us to see the big picture, and that it gives continuity to our lives. And by adding music to our lives, we also add continuity in that way also, and that we hang our memories on the shape of sound. And what I mean by that is that I believe that when you hear that song, whichever it is, whether it's Nights in White Satin or She Loves You by the Beatles, or Magical Mystery Tour, or anything that is special to you, you always remember who you were with, what you were doing, what you were thinking, the circumstances, all of those things. And I believe that music of the right type formats our memory. It formats our memory for long-term storage. And that's a magical quality, once again, of music. And of course, that has been my main interest since I was just a little toddler and was listening to Jimmy Durante singing I'm the Guy That Found the Lost Chord.
What circumstances prompted you to do these 3 CDs of children's stories?
Well, it was the ideas of, of seeing a generation, for instance, that is just moving now into their early manhood and womanhood, where there's a big hole, a big void, and an incredibly increased crime rate, and a lack of understanding for each other, and all of the negative things that are being promoted. A generation that has been pumped full of pulp fiction and bad music and bad politics and bad corporate thinking and all of the things that we know are wrong with our civilization. There's nothing wrong with the planet, it's only the civilization that has a problem. And so I realized that the kind of things that I had when I was a young child, like the inspiration from the Lost Chord story and people like Danny Kaye and lots of other people like that who left something with me when I was so young, and so ready to receive those kind of seed ideas, planted in me, that set me on a path for the rest of my life, which they did, that maybe I could really do some good by, instead of trying to put all of my attention on, adults of my age or possibly younger, who were already formed and had already made their minds up and were already opinionated, that I should probably put my energy into the young people, because it's by well, I have a saying that I've recently come up with, and that is, in the 1960s we were reaching for the stars. In the 1990s we're reaching for our pocketbooks, and I'm reaching for the children, hoping they will remember through the stories. By adding the music to the stories, I'm hoping that they will have these values instilled into them, so that so it'll set their lives on a path, and that the world and will be a better place, and maybe humanity will leave its Klingon heritage behind and move out and become interplanetary beings.
You were talking about a lot of the music, particularly that a lot of the people, well, my age, listen to. And you were talking about, the contrast between, like, the messages that, in your songs. Do you think that that's changing at all, or do you think that that's just going to be, it's a lost cause, or, what do you think?
Well, once again, here come those metaphors, once you start me with these metaphors, you won't be able to stop me. But I was just thinking about this the other day, talking with someone along similar lines. And, the reason for the kind of music that some of the music, of course, I'm not saying that everything is, but some of the music, and maybe a large proportion of it, has had an emptiness to it. It has had no color. It has been just forms of metallic. The tensile feel of the music has been metallic. It's been shiny and dark and steel and glass, to quote John Lennon. It's been very empty. It's been full of misunderstanding and those kind of things, and lacking vision. And music has always been a commentary on the social order, and so it is a reflection of our society. And unfortunately, that is in some instances a true reflection of segments of our society. But behind all of that, there is many, many wonderful human beings, mothers, fathers, sons and daughters, friends and acquaintances, who are there and are also cringing as I am, that that we're being pumped full of this particular music. And I don't think it necessarily is the fault of the people, the public, because I don't think truly that they're asking for it. It's being pumped down through the sausage factory, giant record companies and things like that, who are thinking corporate types only. And I don't think it's the fault of the musicians either. I think also that they're being prompted because they're young bands who they'll do almost anything to make it, and so you get a few stereotypes. The record companies promote them to the hilt, and they become, they hold them up and say, you've got to be like these and we'll sign you up. So it's this carrot on a stick kind of situation. So I don't blame them either. But I do think that out of that, I do see those glimmers of hope. I still see some of my dear friends from the 60s still out there plugging Neil Young, for instance, and Joni Mitchell with her new album, which is absolutely fantastic. It's from the heart and the gut, and that's what we really need to be seeing and listening to. Although we are hearing some gut music from some of the artists and musicians out there, unfortunately the feelings that they're feeling are not necessarily positive. And that's because they're not looking to that end of things. It's probably a part of adolescence, and they have not come to terms with, their reality at this point. But at the same time, to use the analogy of something that always happens, a part of nature, which is that the cows are in the pasture and they eat the grass and they drop patties on the ground. But eventually, out of that patty will grow a mushroom, which is delightful to eat.
One thing in particular that I want to bring up, and I know you have a particular interest with computers.
Yes.
But one thing that I want to talk about is the internet. It was through internet connections, actually, that I was able to first figure out how to make contact with you for this, and then talk with people about, you know, the upcoming interview and everything. And I do know that you've done internet chats and you know, communicated with people over the internet. Do you see this as a resource that's, you know, you're going to use more in the future, or how, you know, what do you think of it all?
Well, certainly it's very interesting. Unfortunately, it's very sluggish from my point of view. When I get on the internet and do a chat, it takes 2 hours to answer about 12 questions. So it's very, very slow from that point of view. And I often think to myself, why don't we all get on a big conference call on the phone? It'd be a lot easier and probably even more fun, you know. But it is a new medium, and it's very interesting, and I think it has a lot of value. As long as it can be kept somewhat private, and as long as control of it will be still left to the public, then I think, you know, it stands a chance of becoming something really useful for us as human beings. And the part I really enjoy, or the vision of it, of course, is that people of all cultures, of all race, of all colors, of all creeds, will be able to talk to each other. And those are happening now. You know, we've got people talking to each other from either side of the world. And they don't necessarily know what color each other's skin is or what shape their eyes are, because it's all coming through this medium. So this is the wonderful thing, and they're finding things in common. I know of several couples who have met on the internet, have got married, fallen in love on the internet. So, you know, that's all very, very wonderful. But if that continues, then I think we have a really good thing going for us. But at the same time, if it becomes just the tool, another tool of you know, corporate thinking and the almighty dollar and greed, then unfortunately it's going to just be another lost cause.
Do you foresee more chats in the future, and more work on the internet?
Certainly, yes. I do enjoy, even though it does take a long time, I do enjoy a couple of hours on the internet every so often, and I've tried to make myself available at least every couple of months. I'd like to do it a little more often if possible. But everyone needs to get a faster computer. But if we wait a few more months, you know, we'll have the big zing banger that's probably on the way, since you probably noticed that a $2,000 hard drive is now about $239, and that's because I believe right now everything of that particular technology is being dumped, and I think that we've got something really fast and really compact and very small, very compact and very fast coming around the corner. That, you know, technology doesn't, they don't like to leak anything about technology until they're ready to set it to you, because that's the way that machine works, you know. I mean, I'm fully convinced that that they had fast hard drives to start with, but they had to start with a low one so they could build them, put a new couple of buttons and a new light and a little bit faster and all those things to keep the continuity of their business, because this is the way things work, unfortunately, on this planet.
So we know we're in store for some more internet chats and 2 more story CDs. What other plans do you have for the future?
A heavy recording schedule for the next year or so, definitely, because there's many things that I would like to do, and I do love being creative. That's the most important thing to me. That's when I'm most alive, is when I'm being creative. Being recreative is just not as attractive to me, and that's, you know, really, that is played out, of course, obviously, by the fact that I'm not touring with the band or playing with the band anymore. What I have in mind is I'm about halfway through writing a book right now, which is a stream of consciousness essays on the titles of my songs, and I'm going to package that along with an instrumental and poetry album, which will be based on some mild contemplation, meditation, theme music, also based on sort of theta, delta, alpha brainwave patterns, which is the kind of thing that we need to be able to relax to. And at the same time, some poetry, some pretty far-reaching poetry, actually. I would say that Among the Stars, the poem from Among the Stars, would be a window the kind of thing that I'm writing poetry-wise. It would be something that it would be an indication of the kind of poetry that I'm going to be delving into. And so that is a package that I want to be doing in the coming year after the two children's family albums. And there's another kind of instrumental album that I'm thinking about, something based on the Waters Beneath the Bridge track. Maybe an album of that kind of music, and then certainly a follow-up album to Among the Stars. And then maybe, the next question I'm sure you're going to ask, then maybe when I've done the follow-up album to Among the Stars, then if circumstances are right, I would contemplate possibly asking some of my friends to accompany me on a tour.
One of the things that you just mentioned, I remember in your video from Phoenix, when you were giving a talk in Phoenix, you were talking about the yoga of the East and West, and you were comparing them. And it seems to me that maybe, I'm asking this, I don't know, was it that you tried the go into the cave approach and realized that that wasn't the way to go in you know, kind of coming back to the tribe, as you said? Is that how you feel? You know, maybe you started it and then decided that, you know, this wasn't the way to go, and then, or how do you feel?
Well, I think it was more of the study and contemplating the circumstances of the yoga of the East and the yoga of the West, and looking at the yoga of the East. If this is truly the way, then how come we have such incredible poverty and starvation in the Eastern countries, i.e. India, Pakistan, and the like? And so obviously, if the answer is there, then it is very well hidden. And then I look to the West and I see, well, if we have the answer here in our Gothic cathedrals and the like, then why am I seeing children on the street, and the abuse of children, and the starvation of children, and the starvation of people, and the homelessness of people? Why am I seeing these kind of things? And the almost insurmountable mountain of greed that we're seeing in the world today. You know, why are we seeing these things if we have this wonderful answer to all of our problems in the various religions of the world? And so, looking at that very hard, I had to come to the conclusion that the answer definitely lies there, but it's deeply, deeply buried in symbolism, psychology, and metaphor, and our lack of understanding of what these things really mean, and how we should be using them in our lives. So it was not necessarily the fact that I might have gone to a cave and tried it out. I didn't go to a cave, but I did find a well within myself just by being quiet and sitting still. And I think, you know, the answer is as simple as that. And I have to reflect upon a song I wrote called A Simple Game. And also one of my favorite sayings, which is, it's so simple, it evades us. And I think that, you know, we in the West in particular tend to look for this very convoluted, complicated answer to all of these things, when the answer is just so very, very simple. And the connection with children, of course, is the fact that they, when children are very small, they are not conditioned. And we are so conditioned as we grow older and become adults. By the time we become an adult, we're conditioned in almost every way, in our thinking, in our doing, and in our believing, and everything we do. And so we have to look back at the children and look back at the child within ourselves to find out, well, who is the real me? And, you know, which part of me started that argument I had 3 days ago? Was that really me, or was it something that I was conditioned to do? Because, you know, when someone comes up to you and presses a button and does this to you, or whatever it may be, and all of a sudden you're feeling this anger or this emotion come up in you, it's because of some conditioning that happened, because some bully at school when you were 4 years old punched you in the nose or something like that. Something happened, someone was very nasty to you or something, and all of a sudden you're conditioned to respond to that. And it goes all the way through, whether you're responding to a nicotine habit, or alcohol, or a bad mother-in-law, or a bad boss, or someone who treated you badly, It's all of those things. So when we look at the conditioning, we see that we respond to this. If we can look back beyond those responses and try and sort of nip them in the bud, then we begin to get a glimpse of who we really are. And there's a favorite saying, I'm not sure whether I mentioned it on that video you spoke of, but something that really struck a chord with me, and that was a saying that the distance that we as an individual walk from our soul, the distance that we walk away to create this personality, this character that we become, that in your case has become Bill and in my case has become Michael. That distance, whatever that ego is and thinks that it is, that distance is the sum total of the pain we feel every day, the subconscious pain that we feel. We think that we feel happy and everything, but somehow or other, deep down within us, there's this sort of subconscious pain. It's almost like when you have that toothache, you know, or that headache, and for a little while you don't really notice it, you know, but then comes the moment and you notice it. But the pain's still there sometimes if you're preoccupied with something. And when we're so preoccupied with our lives, so preoccupied with paying taxes and all of the things that our civilization has bestowed upon us, we tend to forget the pain that is in our daily lives because we're so separated from our very being, from our souls. So I thought that, you know, you can see how obviously that little saying had a profound effect upon me and my thinking.
Some thoughts that I assume will be reflected in some of your music that we're going to hear in the future?
Well, I'm certain, yes. I mean, food for thought seems to be the manna from heaven. There isn't a day goes by when something is not thrust in front of me for examination.
Well, I'm sure we'll look forward to hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
We ride the waves, distance is gone, will we find out how life began, will we find out, speeding through the universe, thinking is the best way to travel.